Welcome everybody, and welcome to the first episode in our series, Recipe for Success. Lisa, what is Recipe for Success?
This is a series where we explore food safety through the eyes of industry experts, and we're delighted today to have with us Kathryn Gilbertson, who's a regulatory lawyer and an environmental health practitioner.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm Kathryn Gilbertson. I'm a solicitor and have been a solicitor now for nearly 30 years. And prior to that, I was an environmental health officer for 10 years. I am a partner at HCR Hewittsons and specialise in food safety and health safety.
So Sterling, what is the Lion? Can you explain that for us?
Well, to me, Lisa, quite simply, it's the best food safety system that we've ever had in this country. You can remember the days when we were EHOs in the 1980s when we had the big salmonella scans. And it was the way that the industry reacted to give consumers confidence in their eggs again. And you remember the days when British Lion first came out and we had the assurance that we got rid of salmonella. And for me, it is the best food safety scheme I've seen, even globally, because we use the best veterinary science, we use the best agricultural science, the best public health science, we use the best environmental health science, and working with regulators and trade bodies, I think we produced the safest scheme that you could have. And it's the envy of the world, the British Lion scheme.
And it's only in the UK, isn't it?
Yes, you're quite right about that. And it only covers poultry as well, so it doesn't cover ducks. But that's a very good point to make, Lisa.
So it really gives people confidence when they buy those eggs that they're doing everything they can to protect themselves or their customers from salmonella and pretty much anything else that might come in with an egg if it hasn't been made to such satisfactory standards.
So Lisa, for you, what does British Lion mean to the catering sector?
I think what it's doing, it's meaning that the catering sector can have confidence that they are going to protect their customers. There's not going to be a risk of salmonella. And also it's not just the risk of salmonella from an undercooked egg or a runny egg, but it's also the risk of cross-contamination in the kitchen that is removed. I mean, how marvellous to have reached this point where we can eliminate the hazard. And we know in health and safety that if you can eliminate the hazard, then that's the best step of control. And this enables caterers to have that trust, and it means that we've taken that risk element out of using eggs and runny eggs for all people, not just for healthy individuals, but also for those who are vulnerable.
So it's protecting customers, it's protecting businesses. And also I think it helps with regulators as well. We're both EHOs. And if an EHO came into a catering operation and was looking at its food hygiene rating scheme, eggs are quite an important part of that, aren't they? Because of the potential risk of salmonella.
That's right. And I think it builds that confidence in management, which of course is a huge win when you're going for your food hygiene rating. So by demonstrating that you're using Lion eggs, you're showing the EHO that they should have confidence in your management, and you weave that into your food safety management system so that it's always the status. Everybody is always buying Lion eggs. It means that there is that confidence that the EHO can have in the business. And of course, Kathryn could tell us a little bit about what that means in reality with the legal cases, if there was ever any challenge or perhaps a food hygiene issue.
Well, I'd be very disappointed if a client of mine was not using Lion brand eggs, because from a point of view of having a good HACCP process and proving that they've done all due diligence, that's reasonable precautions and due diligence, that they've really got there. When they come in and they haven't, I'm like, why? Why have you exposed yourself so unnecessarily to a prosecution, a chance of giving someone food poisoning, the opportunity for someone to take action civilly, for negligence? I'm just like, why would you do that when you have a fail-safe system which is readily available and approved by everybody? I just find it shocking that someone may not even choose to buy Lion brand eggs.
And we all know, guys, don't we, that there's a lot of imported eggs coming into the country.
Yes.
And the risks posed by those. I suppose if you're an EHO and you didn't see the British Lion mark, then all the questions you'd have to ask the caterer about, well, has the eggs been vaccinated? Have the hens been vaccinated? What safety systems have they got? What farm do they come from? What traceability? And that's very difficult to generate that information, I suppose, if you're a very small food business.
Oh, I'd be surprised they could even justify or even find any documents that would satisfy that. And, we all know cases of fictitious certificates coming through anyway. So why expose yourself to that unnecessary risk?
I think one of the issues at the moment is that the hospitality industry is really going to be hit by a brick in the next few weeks with many things that are coming in that will affect their budget. So, the things like the minimum wage, national insurance and so on. And so it may be tempting for them to go and buy something that's a bit cheaper. And they may be offered something by their supplier that isn't actually a lion egg, comes in a box with a UK sticker on the outside. It's very easy to be hoodwinked, especially if you want to save money. So I think this is something very important to think about, because saving a few pence off an egg could cost your whole business.
Well, it costs your reputation. It would equally cost you in respect of a fine. And these are not just small fines, but significant, because it's on your turnover, not on your profit. And once your name is all over the likes of the Daily Mail or in the internet, why would anybody want to trust you going forward? Customers will choose to go where they can trust the caterer. Would you want to go back there? Probably not.
And I think it's about the caterers as well. Overwhelmingly, the people I see in the hospitality sector want to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
It's very rare you find the bagged egg in that type of situation. It's normally through ignorance that somebody's made a mistake. And I still think that not a lot of caterers realise how dangerous eggs can be if they're outside the line scheme. Indeed, the Food Standards Agency and the Food Standards Scotland make that point, don't they? That they say if you're part of the vulnerable group, if you've got an immune system that's not working properly, if you're a young child or if you're old, then this can be really dangerous. It can make you just very ill. It can kill you. And indeed, Lisa, as we know from our public health days, anyone that gets salmonella, let alone a vulnerable group, it is a crippling disease to have. I've seen people being laid on their backs who are young and fit people. And that is the risk you take as a person, isn't it?
Yeah.
You could actually damage somebody's health. Not but deliberately, but by perhaps cutting a corner or not understanding what these runny eggs can do to people unless they're assured. Is that your view?
Absolutely. And I think people buying eggs in a box that's labelled UK, and when they maybe don't realise that it's only when you open the box, they may have been packed in the UK but imported from elsewhere, such as Poland, for example. And it's only when you open the box and you actually read what's on the label of the egg itself that you can see where it's come from. And of course, in a busy kitchen, they may not have noticed that. They've just seen the UK on the box. Those people will actually be heartbroken if they cause salmonella. They don't mean to do harm, of course not, because the whole idea of running a business is to satisfy customers and have them come back again. But some of the outcomes from salmonella can be reactive arthritis, for example. And now I did a case years ago where this footballer had salmonella and that ruined his career. Now you can imagine the sort of lawsuit that went on about that.
Yeah.
But how awful for him, that he was young and fit, and yet it crippled him. So, this is serious, and sometimes people don't take it seriously enough. But I think for caterers, we also have to think about the stress for them if they do cause someone to be so seriously ill, because that would be with you for the rest of your life, and that can be absolutely devastating.
And equally for the business, it's not just, have I got the paperwork? It's the people. So, you're taking witness statements from the chef. You're taking witness statements from the manager. All of those people may not necessarily be the person who bought the egg or made that decision. And so they are, as you say, devastated that they've caused an illness. But the fact is, they are still being dragged into these proceedings, still having to come into a courtroom, still having to justify a decision that perhaps wasn't made by them. And it's the person that's doing the purchasing, the need to have a proper procurement approach. And it's not just large businesses, but small businesses that need to think twice about, why am I buying this? If it's from the back of a lorry and I'm saving a penny per egg, is it really worth that risk? Because from a due diligence perspective and from a lawyer defending you in the courtroom perspective, it's like, it isn't worth that risk. And your insurance that you might buy may be invalidated because you've taken the wrong route. You've gone down the wrong road. So it's something that, and I'm sure you've come across it many times.
I always recommend to business, I deal with a lot of hospitality business, and I always recommend to take British Lion eggs. So as you say, you eliminate the hazard and you can got assurance for your customers. So not only do I recommend it to businesses, I do it in my own family. So if I take my grandkids out, we have a nice breakfast somewhere, they adore lightly boiled runny eggs, they like lightly fried eggs. I always ask at the caterer place, just as people do now on allergens, is, are you using British Lion eggs? I don't think I'd take the risk with my own family of letting them eat runny food that I haven't got confidence in.
Yeah, especially if you've got young people or like my, elderly mother, the last thing she wants is salmonella. I mean, nobody wants it, but if you're elderly, it could cause death very easily. So I think the other thing that caterers can do is if they use a lion egg, of course they could put that on the menu.
Absolutely.
And that's a selling point, and particularly if their clientele are elderly. So in care homes, for example, it's a real selling point. It's giving people confidence that they're getting the best from the caterer. In little nurseries for young children as well, for example, that could be one of the selling points, that the eggs are only coming from a reputable source, they're lion eggs. Because I have been involved as an expert witness in quite a few eggy situations. For example, one was a nursery where they told the parents that they were using lion eggs, but then they went off and bought some cheap eggs from somewhere else that were imported. And they actually made a food that caused 24 children to have salmonella. And there was quite a big court case. It went on for at least a week, I think. Very expensive court case, and 24 children were made sick because of their failure to follow their policy. And I think that's an important thing, isn't it? If people put it in their policy and their advertising that they're using lion eggs and then they don't,
well, then they have shot themselves in the foot, haven't they? Completely. How do you justify that? And and how do you explain to the court? Because, of course, it's a reverse burden of proof when you come into a courtroom and you're a defendant, that you have to show what you did was reasonable. And you've literally pulled your defence away from you.
To me, it seems inconceivable that you could run an old person's home, a young nursery group, or in a hospital, that you would take that risk. And of course, at the moment we're talking about shell-on eggs, aren't we? But it also covers liquid eggs and other eggs that are used in manufacturing. Have you got any comments about that? If you're pasteurising liquid egg, do you need to have a British Lion egg in the system?
You see, that's a really interesting point, Sterling, because people often think that if you pasteurise something, then it's fine. But of course, if you start with a really dirty ingredient, then pasteurisation is only a log 6 kill. So, if you've got a really, really heavily contaminated ingredient, your pasteurisation isn't going to give you a good product. It's not going to be safe necessarily. So you've got to start with a good ingredient and then pasteurise it.
And then will you also have cross-contamination if you did that?
Yes.
So if you brought in a batch of eggs through your pasteurisation, if you didn't clean that equipment properly, will that then...
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
I hadn't thought about that.
It's the process as well, isn't it? If you try to overcook it, you end up with scrambled liquid eggs. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah,
it's a delicate balance.
It's very delicate, and it's designed to make a part of the HACCP is to bring a cleanish product, as clean as it can be, into the pasteurisation process.
So a message then for caterers, isn't it? It's not just about shell-on eggs, because a lot of caterers quite rightly use liquid egg. Make sure the liquid egg is also covered by the British Lion scheme.
That's a really good point.
So Lisa, one of the big questions we always get asked is, should you put an egg in a fridge? When you go to the supermarkets, you see them stored at ambient. So what's your views at what temperature you should keep eggs?
It's better to keep them a steady temperature and below 20 degrees. The thing is, you don't know, with fluctuations in a hot kitchen, could easily get way above 20. So it's better to just keep them in the fridge, and then you know that they're safe, they're going to be at a sort of a stable temperature. And of course, once you crack the eggs, then you need to keep those refrigerated too. And it's very tempting to take a great big bowl of eggs, crack them all open and leave them there ready to make an omelette, for example, which we call pooling the eggs. But that needs to be refrigerated too, just to keep them safe until they're being used for cooking.
Good advice. And we've seen examples, haven't we? I've saw some examples in Turkey where they weren't cooling the eggs. Have you seen the photographs where when people have cracked them open, they're covered in mold? It's not a safety risk because they're so obviously gone off. But you do find that abroad where they don't have good temperature control, so you can have consequent problems.
And it's not just, not just pure egg. It would be if they were making pancakes, for example.
Yeah.
So often it's very common to have a big bowl of pancake mix right next to the to where the customers come up in queue, and there's all a bit of theatre, But of course, if you've got a massive bowl of pancake mix and it's all at room temperature, maybe it goes back in again to the fridge and comes back out again the next day, and so on. So it's stock rotation with that, just make enough for the day and refrigerate it as long as possible.
And the nice thing about stock rotation is the British Line scheme helps you because it's got a best before date on there, so you can make sure that it's kind of the first that goes in is the first out.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I suppose the other thing is egg safety is not just about salmonella, is it? I know that actually some of the biggest recalls that we've had in eggs in Europe have been on fipronil, which was an insecticide, which are just in this country, 700,000 shell-on eggs were taken off the shelf. And it affected the whole globe from Hong Kong to Holland to Belgium. And then you have other things like dioxins that have caused problems. So chemicals can be just as big a threat as salmonella.
Yes.
Is that your view?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's often forgotten. So what you're buying into is not just the microbiological safety, but also the chemical safety and the provenance of the egg.
And that's an issue, I suppose, legally as well. It's not just about, if it's unfit for human consumption, then it's not just the salmonella, it could be the chemical side as well. Is that right, Kathryn?
Absolutely. And I keep talking about prosecution, but it's not just the criminal approach, it's the civil angle of the customer wanting to take action as well. Because, if you've been made ill by the product, or if you're the worried well, in other words, you haven't actually eaten it, but you're worried because you've bought it and it's in your shelf, ready to use, they still have a claim. They have a claim in negligence through the civil courts. So it's a double whammy, isn't it, for a mistake of purchasing. You've got the opportunity of a prosecution, which is through the criminal courts and big fines, and equally you've got the opportunity of someone taking a civil claim against you for negligence because you have made an error.
So we have the sentencing guidelines, isn't it, which says if you're a smaller business, you obviously don't pay the fine as much as a bigger business would. But the civil case is a really interesting one because the fines there, well, not fines, but the case you can get into really high numbers.
Damages will be significant. Yeah. I mean, worried well are the sort of growth area. The idea of I haven't been taken ill, but I'm concerned that I have this product is making me or my child potentially unwell, and therefore I have been entitled to make a claim. And that is a growth area in the no win, no fee arena.
That's interesting. And of course, with chemicals, that would be exactly where they would be coming from, because it wouldn't be an acute illness, it would be something that could affect them later on in life. For example.
So that latent period, how long are you going to have to wait for? We know with asbestos you wait 20, 30 years. Are we going to note on our medical records that I took little Johnny in and there's a chance he ate dioxin on Tuesday and therefore bring a claim in the future? That's an opportunity for someone thinking that way. So
British Lion eggs are that, aren't they? They can only cover eggs from this country. And a lot of eggs are now being imported as there are shortages, and they don't have the security of the same scheme. So I suppose our border controls are very important. What happens at our docks? And I see, Lisa, that there are resource issues with people inspecting imported food. Do you think that's a threat? I know the FSA have talked about this in the past.
Well, it is a threat, but also, there's got to be, presumably, there's got to be a definite risk. How easy is it for someone to prevent the importation of a foreign egg without actually knowing that it has got salmonella in it? And we haven't got the resources to do that.
So do we think that they're coming in the white van route, or is it coming in the back of a big lorry? I mean, how are these eggs coming in from Spain and Poland and places like that?
We just say some of them aren't being declared because they don't want to go through health checks. So it's not as difficult as it should be to import food into this country. And I think that's a great way of saying it, Kathryn. A lot of them are white vans that aren't picked up at the ports and aren't picked up at their final destination, which could be in the middle of the country in Leicester. Yes. And there's a lot of white van, high protein products coming into the country. And there's and as hard as the EHOs at Port Health work, I just don't think there's enough of them to cover it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real threat. And if you're a caterer, I think, as you say, if somebody turns up at the back of your restaurant or your hotel and says, I've got some eggs that are at half price, it sounds too good to be true. And maybe it is too good to be true, and that you're exposing your business to a risk where you might be saving a few pounds rather than the thousands of pounds that you could put your business at risk to.
I think the other thing is when people run out of something, and it's a critical product in the business. So I was involved in a case where they'd run out of eggs, and they normally only bought Lion eggs. And so someone was dispatched to go and run off to the corner shop and buy some other eggs, and they were making ice cream, which was using a method that involved uncooked eggs. And they actually caused an outbreak because this chef had gone out and just bought any old eggs. And I think even small businesses, be really careful where you get your eggs from. It might just be just buying. He just bought a box of 6. And caused rather a large food poisoning outbreak. And so it's stick to your policy. Have that policy, but stick to it. If you can't get Lion eggs because you've run out, then maybe don't put something on the menu that could put people at risk. Because immediately you do that, you have broken so many of your own rules, and then, of course, poison people.
And part of the issue, isn't it, the scheme only covers poultry. And we saw a chap die quite recently who had a duck egg,
yes,
which isn't covered by the scheme, and got salmonella. And he was an elderly gentleman but died from it. So it is being careful when you're stepping outside of that almost safety net that the scheme gives you. That if you're in catering and you're serving duck eggs, don't serve them soft. Assume that they might come with salmonella and try to take all the precautions you can to avoid that. Certainly don't make mayonnaise out of duck egg, which I saw in a restaurant quite recently, thinking, well, you must be using raw duck egg if you're doing that. And it was a way of selling something special,
exactly.
But really, I think it presented a greater risk.
I mean, chefs love to make something new and exciting, and of course, you don't want to stop that happening. But if it's at the expense of safety, then put the brakes on that and think of another way to do something safely. But yeah, as you say, duck egg mayonnaise, it's tricky, isn't it?
I was aghast. I avoided the duck egg. I think I might have been on the phone to Kathryn straight away to ask for advice.
But do you think that caterers understand the concept of vulnerability? We're not saying that they need to, stop every customer and say, I don't think I should serve it to you because you're over 60. But necessarily, do they understand what a vulnerable person is? Because there's so many groups of individuals now who are vulnerable.
Yeah. I think what we almost need to say is that the food has to be safe for everybody, and that's why Lion is so good. Because people don't know they're vulnerable too. I mean, you could be in the early stages of pregnancy and not know it. You could have an illness that you don't know about. You may be taking drugs to reduce the acid in your stomach, and there are plenty of people more and more taking those drugs, and that makes you more susceptible to food poisoning. So when I have done some sort of back of the envelope calculations about how many people might be vulnerable in this country, or anywhere really, but it could be 60-70% actually when you start thinking about all the factors. And of course we've got an ageing population, we've got all the young people, we've got people who are being treated for cancer, we've got pregnant people, we've got the people on the anti-acid tablets and so on. It stacks up. So my feeling is that the food should be safe for everybody, whether it's eggs or meat or anything, because we don't know who's coming into the restaurant. And many people don't know that they might be vulnerable, and they may not be capable either of assessing the risk.
And I think we're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
I remember in the 80s where we used to investigate the salmonella outbreaks, and you could find an elderly lady who didn't know she had salmonella and it was picked up on a blood test, and she was perfectly fine. And I went to this young guy who was very athletic, and he was on his back. He'd been in hospital for over 2 weeks. And you think you wouldn't put him into the vulnerable group, you'd have put him into the healthy, strong group, you might have argued.
Yeah.
Right age, very fit, no other conditions.
Well,
and
like my footballer.
Completely lays people out. And I think sometimes that's a false sense of security. You think, it's only old people, it's only the young or pregnant, and obviously that's a problem. But if you get it, you'll know you've had it in the vast majority of cases.
Yeah. And there are also all those people who, I know when I've done trips abroad and we've talked to the film crew and they've all gone, I said, don't eat the buffet, do not eat the buffet. And they go, no, we've got cast iron stomachs. And that's a myth, isn't it, really?
And then when I travel abroad, I never really have runny eggs because I don't think the schemes cover it. And demonstrably, especially in some countries, it's almost endemic in some countries. There's lots and lots of cases. And there are a couple of countries that if I went to, there's no way I'd eat a runny egg or any egg because you don't want to, it's just not worth taking the risk. You can try to go for something else.
Do you know what? That's a really good point because I have gone and investigated illnesses contracted abroad, and one was in Turkey for Watchdog years ago. And people were eating all these runny eggs, and there was a lot of salmonella on the holiday village. And I think we actually have a full sense of security in this country because most of the eggs are lion, and so we can eat them runny now, and we can eat them with confidence. And we forget that. We go abroad and we think, oh, I'll just carry on as normal. And you're absolutely right. You know, I have to stop myself and think, no, I'm not having a runny egg. I was with a friend in France and she was making mayonnaise out of eggs, you know, from scratch. And I just thought, I'm not sure about this. Chocolate mousse from scratch, all these things that we take for granted. I made chocolate mousse actually for her at the weekend with lion eggs, thinking, I know I'm not going to be poisoning you, but I wasn't so sure when I ate your mousse.
No, you were in Spain recently, weren't you? Spain is continuous reports of issues with salmonella in eggs because of the nature of the food that they do, and they like their eggs very runny, isn't it? It's a very strong cultural thing, and it's a regular outbreak. And I suppose if you're a tourist going out there, then you expose yourself to that same risk.
Of course. So you have to think when you're going abroad, what am I actually eating? I haven't got that security that we have in the UK.
So do you think people that refresh their HACCP documents to consider lion eggs, you know, as in they'll have written the HACCP documents, and some people I know tend to leave them on the shelf and not actually translate them into process. So do you think it's a really good idea for people to go back and refresh that document, make sure they've specified lion egg, and are actually then encouraging their procurement teams or whoever is buying for them to make sure they really are doing that?
Well, any HACCP process, as you well know, Kathryn, starts off with identifying what the hazards are. And most people identify egg as a hazard because it's well known some of the issues with it, chemical and microbiological. And then the next section with, well, how are you going to control that? That's what I think prompts most people in my experience to think, well, if I use British Lion Egg Scheme, then that's my control measure. Because I know about the traceability, I know about the vaccination, I know that this chain of confidence goes from when I buy it from my retailer or my stockist, right back to where the hatcheries are. And I think that's what a lot of people do. That's what triggers people to think, oh, that's where I can control it. But as you say, if you haven't identified it as a hazard, you're in for a big problem. And then if you still not using an egg, you have all that information on. How do you demonstrate, Kathryn, that you've taken all the right steps? Because it must be really complicated to list all the control measures down.
Well, I don't think they do. That's why I'm questioning. It's just one of those alarm bells of, oh my goodness. You know, and there is a tendency for some in the sector to have a written approach, but never actually put it into practice. And I'm just thinking, now's a good time perhaps to do a refresh and double check I'm really doing that.
Yeah, particularly, you know, if people are tempted to buy cheaper imported eggs, and it needs to be drummed into all the staff. These are the only, you know, look for the lion, it's that simple, and make sure that you only use lion eggs.
Yeah, a lot of the surveys that have been carried out demonstrate there's a high level of awareness among chefs in this country about the importance of British Lion Egg and what it does. I think where you start to see concern is when you ask those questions about imported eggs, chefs don't realise that eggs from abroad aren't necessarily for the same standard. And I think that's the weakness is, I think as Lisa put it, you get that false sense of security. We don't have problems with eggs in this country anymore, or we've got a great scheme. And people always assume that if it comes from abroad, then they must have gone through the same very vigorous process.
Or they could be hoodwinked really by the carton, which says UK on it, the outer carton.
Absolutely.
From a big box of eggs. The eggs have come through one way or another. They may have been checked at the port. They may have come on a white van. They've gone into a packing station. Because they're packed in the UK, they can have a UK sticker on the outside. They don't think to look inside the box. So my big takeaway is always look inside the box. Look at the egg and see what's actually on the egg. Make sure that it's got the lion on it.
Well, that's a very good point to perhaps stop. Kathryn, any last thoughts from you? It's really great to have a lawyer here casting your expert eye over the industry and the controls and management systems we have in place.
I suppose I come with, the EHO on one side and the lawyer on the other, because I am both. And I just have to encourage everybody to just do it. And please don't take the shortcut, because the shortcut is going to cause you no end of problems, genuinely no end of problems. My fear is they think they could get away with it, and they will discover that they no longer have insurance. And what happens when you no longer have insurance? It means you're personally paying. And businesses can't afford that. So, just do it.
And what do you think then, Lisa? What would be your final thought?
Always buy a lion egg.
I would echo that. It just makes sense. You're guaranteed food safety. You're guaranteed quality, aren't you? You've got a guarantee in provenance, and you know where the egg's coming from. And you know that certain welfare standards have been met as well. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Certainly it's my advice to people in catering, and certainly with my own family, my grandkids certainly only eat the British Lion scheme.
Cuts out the worry, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of things to worry about, grandkids. Don't add kids to that list.